Microphone, can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to compress a lot of complicated information into about a 30-minute window. I'm not going to try and go so fast that people get mixed up, but if the tempo gets ahead of things, somebody stick your hand up so I know that we're missing stuff. Okay? So thanks to the Lake Beulah Management District for asking us to do the work, to be down here to talk with you all. If you look at the top right-hand side of this first slide, you'll see what drives what we do. Science informs public policy. Thoughtful, methodical preparation of information helps people make good judgments about things. And that's the spirit in which we provide this information to you. We're research people. I'm an ex-naval officer. I've had life experiences where it's important to tell the truth. So we're going to tell you the truth. The data is the data. And then we'll take a look at the data. Okay, next slide. Go ahead. So this is what we're going to cover here tonight in these slides. The design of recreational boats that are used for wake surfing, how actually they're constructed to do what they're designed to do. Some people are not aware of that, so we want to explain how that works. We're going to talk about how waves work in the water, in particular a displacement wave. They have physics characteristics that are replicable and undeniable, and we're going to explain that to you. We'll talk both about surface impacts that everyone can see. Many of these things you've already seen. So surface waves are easy to watch from the shore or from a vessel when you're on the water. We're also going to talk about buffering distances, wave attenuation differences. They're based on how far the wave propagates and what, if any, damage it might do if you're within or outside of that buffering distance. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about subsurface impacts. You'll hear us go back and forth between impacts that are seen and impacts that are not seen. Things that are happening under the water. We'll talk about propeller downwash, sometimes referred to as slipstream. So the propellers that drive these vessels are at an angle that produces an energy source that has an impact. We'll talk about that and explain it, show you videos. So besides numbers and tables, you're going to see pictures, images. Then we'll talk about nearshore impacts. And finally, the worrisome business of sediments that are being redistributed off lake beds here in our country in lots of freshwater lakes. So as Pat Bergen said, we've been to a number of lakes on the east coast and here in the Midwest. And there's other science groups that we'll make reference to that are doing the same studies. The data is in agreement. When science agrees, you start to pay attention. So that's the purpose of this briefing, is to walk you through those things. Next slide. This is some legalese. This is all being YouTube. You can go to the site to read the legalese. The reason we put it here is because at some point or another, if people trying to come up with guidelines or an ordinance or even statutory language, they have to have legal descriptions of things. That's why this is here. We can come back to it again. We want to compress the information. Next slide. So wakeboat intensity, the actual engineering. How are they made? What is their purpose? They're manufactured specifically contemporary wakeboard boats now in the last 4 or 5 years or so. They are designed to enhance the height of a wave and to shape a wave so that a person can surf behind the boat without a tow rope on a small wakeboard. Specifically designed for that purpose. How do they do it? They craft very high power engines. We'll talk about that with you in a moment. They introduce heavy ballasting so that the center of gravity on the boat changes and the stern drags into water, which produces a big displacement wave. And finally, now they have computerized systems on the vessels so that the pilot, the operator of the boat, can actually computer generate information to those systems to make a wave be shaped left or right, higher, not as high, the distance between them wider for an inexperienced surfer as opposed to a very experienced surfer. So the technology has become very, very sophisticated, which is why these vessels cost a lot of money. 200,000 plus. Next slide. Power plants. Top left is a Mastercraft engine that is typical for what open source information tells us is something you'd find in a wakeboard boat for surf boat purpose. The engine horsepowers range from 450 up to 650 horsepower for a single engine. I'm an aviator. On a light twin engine aircraft, we have two engines that are about 500 horsepower. This is a big engine. Below that on the left is a typical Penta inboard-outboard engine for water skiing. Ideal horsepowers for those engines, about 250 horsepower. So a range of magnitude which is significant. That's power plant. Next slide. The design of the hull, of the hull, displaces water. So the design of the hull itself is designed to produce a displacement wave at a certain configuration on the surface of the water. Next slide. The technology I made reference to allows for a computer-driven capacity to move angles on wedges, foils, and gates, and other speed control devices on these vessels so that you can tailor-make a wave. It's wonderful technology. We had some of that in the Navy on a warship. These boats operate around 8 to 10 miles an hour. And so their configuration on the water is unmistakable. So if you go to the next slide, jump one more slide up. That's a wakeboard boat in surf mode. They're easy to spot because the deck angle on the bow is up about 15 degrees. The stern is down in the water. They move slowly and they produce a great big wave. So that's the design and manufacturing components that go into one of these vessels. Next slide. Charles is going to chat with you a little bit, my colleague Charles, about the actual physics of a displacement wave. It's very important that you understand that there's energy being generated on the surface that you can see, as well as below the surface that you cannot see. And the movement of that energy is something which is predictable and recurs every time about the same way, depending upon the topography at the bottom of the lake. So I'll defer to Charles for a moment.
Tom, will you provide us with a copy?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
So what you see on the surface is that wave propagating. We call it a divergent wave. It's what's propagating from the back of the boat towards shore. But there's also energy underwater, and that energy that's subsurface is typically half of the wavelength. So if there's between two waves, it's showing here 20 feet, as those waves are coming in, there's also subsurface energy that's following in. When you get to shallower water, you get bottom scrubbing. Basically, that energy is now being dissipated. And this is much akin to what you see, if you go to the ocean, where you see the swells and then you see the waves start to build. Surfers do it there too. And ultimately, because the water's getting shallower, the wave gets taller because the bottom is basically pushing that water up. It's got to go somewhere. And then ultimately it breaks and it crashes on shore. So one of the things is that it's not just the wave that actually reaches the shore, but it's the energy underneath that's also affecting what's on the bottom.
So there's been a series of studies that have been done throughout the United States. In the Midwest, our group, on the East Coast, our group, an engineering firm out in Georgia, and the University of Minnesota at St. Anthony Falls Lab. We are all looking at surface and subsurface impacts relative to wakeboard boats in surf mode. A wakeboard boat doesn't have to be in surf mode. A wakeboard boat can be used like a regular ski boat. It can be put on plane, then it doesn't produce a very large displacement wave, no longer an issue. So it's a dual-use vessel. The technology I described to you is capable of producing waves that are 3 to 4 feet high off the surface of the lake. That's a big wave. That's why people like it, because they can surf on a freshwater lake right behind a boat. I don't think there's anything more I want to say about this. This is data that we gathered on your lake that depicts the energy associated with waves being produced by 3 different kinds of commonly used vessels. A wakeboard boat in surf mode, a jet ski boat, and an inboard-outboard ski boat. The red arrow is a measurement index based on how high the wave heights are. So the wave height is bottom to crest, and a nominal index in the middle. If you look at those wave curves closely, the one up at the top has the highest cresting waveform. The one in the middle, which is the jet ski boat, is about half that distance. And the one on the bottom, the typical IO boat, just a little bit less. So about half of the height of a wave is being produced by jet ski boats and inboard-outboard boats, compared to a wakeboard boat in surf mode. In surf mode, non-planing, plowing through, bow angle up. You want to add anything?
Yeah, so one of the things related to the physics is that if you double the height of the wave, you actually have the square of the energy. An easier way of describing that is if the wave is twice as high, it's 4 times the amount of energy. And so I've depicted that in a simple way. If you've got a wave that's on the bottom, if the wave is twice as high, you've basically got 4 of those triangles. The wave is that much bigger. There's that much more mass and energy behind it.
Pictures are worth 1,000 words. So we use aerial commercial drones to create images as you would see it from the air. So this is a bird's eye view. This is 400 feet AGL, 400 feet above the ground, in a drone equipped with a powerful camera that is giving you a picture of the wave heights and the distances between the wave heights that we just talked about, the wave length. The top right-hand photograph is of a wakeboard boat wave. Notice that the wave lengths are substantial compared to a conventional speedboat. Bottom left, the wavelength is shorter, significantly shorter. And then finally, a jet ski boat. Again, very, very significant difference. Small amount of wavelength, therefore less energy. In another world, I'm a flight instructor. I used to live on North Lake, 40 years. Charles and I were neighbors. Our practice area for teaching people to fly airplanes was over North Lake. So I flew over that lake 3 or 4 days a week for years with students at about 1,000 feet above the lake. One afternoon I noticed in about that same area, if you want to back up, a large balloon, maybe 400 or 500 feet wide, moving towards that reef. When it got to the reef, which is you see the foliage, North Lake has got a little lake and a big lake connected but divided by a reef. So I'm watching this plume from the airplane, and I watch it coming up to the shoreline, running along the edge of the shoreline. In fact, I turned the plane around to watch it. It was so interesting. And then it jumped over the reef, and it settled on the other side. On the other side of that reef was deep water with an extreme slope. The side to the east of it, or to the west of it, was shallow, or shallow shelf that goes way out. It just didn't look right. So we got some more imagery with drones, and we took it to the Southwestern Regional Planning Commission, marine biologists, hydrologists, and they all went, this is of concern. Wakeboard boats in surf mode in frequent use on that lake, particularly the small lake, are raising up sediments that are producing these plumes, and they're jumping over that reef, and when they settle on the other side, they kill off the aquatic plant life. Serendipity. I happened to be flying with a student on the day when I saw it. So we got interested. We got into this. Next slide. More on surface impacts. We wanted to be able to demonstrate what you see if you stand on the shoreline of your home on the lake, about how far the wave impacts. And so we set up a controlled pass at 200 feet away from the shoreline. This would be on the south side of your lake, as I recollect. This is a wakeboard boat in surf mode, 200 feet from the shoreline, passing by in surf mode operation. So look top left, you'll see the boat going by slowly. Now I want you to draw attention to the wave that is attenuating up, propagating in towards the shore. It comes in slowly, it takes about a minute or so to get in there. I want you to watch the fishing boat that's tied up to that dock, and then watch the shoreline when it gets all the way in. This is a 200-foot buffering distance. This exists on many lakes in Wisconsin, 200 feet. Okay. Now let's compare it with an inboard-outboard ski boat. Same distance, same course. Top left is the wakeboard boat, you just saw it. Top right, jet boat. Bottom left, inboard-outboard boat. And then finally, inboard-outboard boat in transition. Transition is a technical term for movement of the boat, either slow to wake or up on plane. So the activity in between that is a transition mode. It produces a little bit of a wake. Significant differences between those vessels. There just is. Now we're going to go to 500 feet, because some of the studies, even that we've done out in Connecticut, we did a big study on Lake Warmouth in Connecticut, there are indications that it ought to be 500 feet in order for that energy to dissipate in the wave. So now we're going to look at it from 500 feet, same configuration, wakeboard boat top left, jet ski boat top right, IO boat bottom left, IO transition. All of them at 500 feet from the shoreline, precisely measured with lasers. Wave coming in. This is real-time comparisons. Okay. I don't know if we need to show this video, but no, the fact is that
it's, the 500 foot, we showed you the time when the wave was basically propagating close to the shore. It takes about 1.5 minutes from 500 feet. So by the time the boat's gone by, it's about another 1.5 minutes before that wave is finally reaching the shore. But you saw that comparison where we aligned the various videos.
Which introduces another variable, which is a human factor variable. If I'm driving a wakeboard boat with an up angle on the bow, I'm paying attention, looking around both sides of the bow to make sure I don't hit somebody. I'm not looking behind me 1.5 minutes to see what I left. You see it on the shore, very often innocently, the drivers of these vessels don't know that they're producing these impacts. Okay,
So this is 500 versus 200, the buffering distance.
I think we made our point.
Yeah.
So, traditional non-wake surf mode operations have buffering distances that are incompatible with what was set up 25 or 30 or 40 years ago for a crestliner with a 50-horse motor on the back to go water speed. That's where the 100-foot and 200-foot buffering distances came from. These boats are different animals. It's a different wave. It's a different wave energy. So the traditional buffering distances just don't make sense. They need to be longer. If you're concerned about the threat associated with a boat banging against a pier, a grandson in 3.5 feet of water getting knocked over, some potential impact.
Can I just mention the map on the left?
On the left is, remember the legal language I was going to skip over? It defines in that legal language something called a wakeboard operating zone. The state of Vermont, which we helped craft some of their statutory language, is the first state in the country to have statutory language at the state level to limit the activity of wake boats in surf mode in lakes that don't afford deep water and at least 50 contiguous acres of area to operate in, so room to protect other vessels and other things going on in the lakes. There's now an app that has been developed so that the operator of one of these boats could look at his phone and go, okay, I'm in the zone I belong in, I'm okay. If they're behaving responsibly, it's a human conduct thing, right? So that's a sample of what would be on a phone. Now, we're gonna talk with you now about the waves themselves. There's 4 sources of energy on wakeboard boats in surf mode that create the impacts subsurface. There's a bow wave. The bow is pushing water in front of it. That's source 1. There's a stern wave. It's displacing water 3 to 4 feet. There's the interaction of the 2 waves together, transverse waves. And finally, there's a propeller wash wave effect. If there's any aviators in the room, one of the things we teach students when they're learning to fly airplanes is not to fly in bad weather where there's any risk of a microburst. A microburst is a huge source of energy that comes from the bottom of the plow deck that goes right to the surface, hits the surface, and spins up like this. That's akin to the energy that comes off the propellers of one of these powerful engine systems. So 4 sources of energy are impacting the lake bed, the subsurface. Bow wave, stern wave, transverse waves, and top wash. So what happens underneath the surface? We've studied that. It's been studied by other groups as well. And now we're going to talk with you a little bit about the subsurface impacts. Go back. When those energy sources come off the surface of the lake. They will go down over 25 feet. We've demonstrated that. The impact is determined by what the lake bed is composed of. So if the lake bed has got a huge aquatic plant distribution and it's thick, it'll have an impact, the energy gets down there, but if you put a camera on it, you see the aquatic plants kind of going, what happened here? But not much else compared to a lake bed that's loose, muddy. When that energy gets there, it's like an explosion. You see all that sediment come up. On a lake bed that's marl or limestone or sandy, you don't see as much of that comes up because it's densely packed and it's staying where it is. So the lake bed is an issue relative to measuring the impact. The energy is there. Your lake has a lot of aquatic plants that make for wonderful fish habitat. Cara, coontail, pondweed. So here's something I learned. The root structure of some of those aquatic plants doesn't suit this energy coming down because it doesn't have much of a root structure. So Cara is like a big blanket that just lays on the bottom. It absorbs phosphorus, it's a good aquatic plant, but it has nothing to hold it to the bottom. So when we show you an image in a little while of lake energy, lake quote surf mode energy hitting the bottom, you'll see a Cara bed undulating. In another view, we'll show you coontail and pondweed. They don't have root structure, they dig down into the bottom. They kind of lay along the bottom. In fact, one of those two, I forget which one, just has a little thing called a rhizoid. Its root just kind of dangles in the water column and gets nutrients from the water column. It has nothing holding it to the bottom. When this energy comes down in an area where you have aquatic plants like that, they're ripped up. They're gone. Fish are like people. They like to be safe. So fish like aquatic plant habitat where they can hide and raise their young. When you take that away, it has an impact on the fish life cycles. I'm not a marine biologist, I'm not an ichthyologist. I'm a guy with eyeballs that studies things. It has an impact, and that's been replicated again and again and again. What else happens on a lake bed that we now know about from our own studies? Depending upon what's in that sediment, if it's disturbed